We'll give everyone just another moment here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started, guys. I want to start off by saying I thank everyone for coming here today and joining us for this webinar. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So why are we here? So we're here because there's some geopolitical global items playing out right now that we're all aware of. There's, attacks on countries happening right now. So with that being said, we wanted to take this opportunity to discuss some security initiatives and think about things that are happening in against, our businesses and things of that nature. So we're here because we wanted to divulge some information that we have and talk through some of the intelligence that we have and give people an opportunity and obviously give out some suggestions for, based around what we're seeing out there and disseminate as much information as we feasibly can in a short period in time. So that leads us to the next question there of what are we seeing out there? And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a moment and talk through a couple things that we are seeing out there. So I'm actually going to reshare something out here. Share. And there we go. Move all of this stuff out of the way. All right, so what are we seeing out there? So we're seeing quite a bit. One thing, this Gray Noise is one of our threat intelligence providers. Something I wanted to showcase here is these top tags. What we're looking at is a classification of malicious. And so some of the things we're going to talk about here in a few moments around recommendations and things of that nature are because of some of these things that I'm going to kind of showcase right here. So top tags that we're seeing, and what this means is as it pertains to this individual threat intelligence provider, the things that they're seeing the most of are SMBV1 crawlers, Eternal Blue exploits, the Mirai botnet, web crawlers, and telnet brute forcers. So just something to think about if you look at this, if you take a step back and you look at that, that's pretty crazy, right? So the things that some threat actors are focusing in on right now are things like SMBV1 vulnerabilities, very old vulnerability. Eternal Blue, another SMBV1 vulnerability, SMBV2 vulnerability that really is a patchable offense. So that's what we're seeing is the top two things just from this threat intelligence provider is people going after SMBV1. So what that's going to kind of lead into what we'll talk about where we talk about how to shore up some of your defenses. Things that they're also seeing out there from a malicious standpoint is China net backbone. DoD Network Information Center is going pretty high. Clear Limited. These are just some metrics around different IP addresses, who owns them, and the amount of attacks they're seeing right now, this threat intelligence provider. Another thing is we figured we'd show some trending analysis from some other ones. So we have Netwire, RAT, MEMS, Formbook, Mirai. So if you notice, you're going to see that these ones are going to be a little bit more specific. Even things like, well, good old Emotet that hasn't gone away, it probably won't go away. Formbook over and over through many different indicators. Bazaar Loader, which goes hand in hand with Emotet quite often. Cobalt Strike and even Conti made this list. So if we pop over here to any run, you can see top countries, submitted ratings. So what this is this is stating that the United States has the highest submitted items to this, right? But if you look at their trending tags, you're going to see Trojan, you're going to see rats. Rats are remote access tools. For those that don't know, Stealers ransomware, evasion tactics and techniques. So any run, what you're looking at here, just a quick explanation is they really focus on malware analysis. So you can drop malware analysis into here. So what you're looking at here is people have submitted malware to any run for analysis. And this is the high trending tags, high categorization tags that they're seeing. Another quick one is NovaSense, and this just gives you a good idea. So the top 3 countries, threats by location, threats coming from IPs from the United States, China, and Russia are the top 3, obviously, right now. So just some quick things on that. That's kind of what we're seeing right now. And something else that we've been seeing is something interesting, a bit of a change, if you will, is in previous engagements, different malwares, different incident responses that we've been a part of, where we've seen a large level of obfuscation between us and the threat actor. Today, we're not seeing that level of obfuscation any longer. We're seeing direct attacks coming from different locations, one of them being Russia. We are seeing a direct attack, scanning, going right after different types of exploits directly from Russia, where previously what we saw was a large matter of obfuscation and very hard to tell or attribute back to where these attacks were coming from. We're seeing direct attacks today. So that's what we're really seeing out there today. In some places that you can go to, obviously Gray Noise is a great one. There's Cisco Talos, there's Intezer, there's a ton of different threat intelligence solutions out there. And by no means did I pick the ones that we really think are the best of the best or anything along those lines. We just really wanted to utilize a couple to showcase, what they look like, what they're seeing, and that, as you look through a lot of these different things, you're going to see different threat intelligence feeds are seeing different things. So you really can't just rely on a singular one. Obviously, you're going to have your favorites and things of that nature. But the last one I really want to suggest out there is following folks on Twitter. I know that that's a really off the cuff and odd one to some people, but Twitter has just been literally on fire over this past weekend. And ever since these events have started to come up, and it's turned into a really, really, really great place for information. Lots of people are putting block lists up from direct attributed attacks that they're seeing against their organizations and things of that nature. So if you're questioning, where can I go find good information? These are some locations. And then obviously, if you want to dive into that, you can feel free to let me know, or anybody that's on this call know, and we'd be happy to have a conversation around, threat intelligence. So with that being said, I'm going to switch that back off and go back to the little our presentation here and share that back out and move these things back out of the way and go back to our slide that we were on. So that's what we're seeing out there today. And I want to turn it over to a couple members of our red team to kind of talk through, if they were in at an adversarial's shoes, what would they be doing today? How are they going to look at this? What would they be thinking about? And what are some things that they would be doing, against businesses if they were on the flip side of the fence?
I'll jump in real quick on that one, and then I'll hand it off to Q to talk more about the more interesting technical side of things. We've been in this cyber war for a really, really long time, and I think that that's one of the biggest gaps that exist right now in the way that people are thinking about this or looking at this. And in a lot of situations, the attacks have already happened, right? They've already gained a foothold. They're already inside of critical infrastructure. These larger nation state operations are executed by teams of people who coordinate to work together to really make sure that when they get a foothold, they exploit that foothold, maintain persistence, and figure out ways that they can leverage and really learn that environment. This isn't your standard drive-by hacking. These aren't, coordinated, distributed denial of service attacks like we're seeing from some of the people that are doing this as a reaction to the war. These are attacks that have likely been happening over years of time. And one of the things that's so scary is that most companies nowadays still are really focused on protecting the edge, and they're not really thinking about that insider threat or the fact that they already probably are compromised inside. So I think that that's something that we really need to think about and be aware of, as well as it's not like we just had the first shot fired, in the last week. This is something that has been an ongoing battle for quite some time. Q?
Definitely. I think you make a good point in there. They are not looking for your 0 days per se. I mean, a lot of these attacks are happening against unpatched, misconfigured infrastructure. So if I were in their shoes, some of the things I would look for, as you're seeing, they're checking for things like SMBv1. If I find SMBv1 on the public internet, and those of you who may not know, SMBv1, SMB itself is the protocol that Windows workstations and users are going to use to communicate. Some authentication may happen over it. So a lot of us, when we obtain any internal access in the network, we look for SMB. We look for hosts and services that we can exploit through it, because there may be older versions that don't use message signing. There may be a possibility to perform password guessing. There may be a possibility to look for things like MS0867 or MS17010, the two of the most commonly exploited vulnerabilities that I've come across in Windows networks to this day, unfortunately. So they're looking for SMBv1. They're looking for eternal blue possibilities. And as an attacker, what really disrupts my attacks in a very basic level is you knowing your infrastructure. Because once you know what exists out there on your network, you already start thinking about patching and configuration issues, right? So my first suggestion in there is start identifying what you have available externally. The attacker is going to look for opportunities such as credential stuffing. They're going to look at previous data breaches. Not to name drop a single company there, but MyFitnessPal, LinkedIn, Adobe, Equifax, Park Mobile, a lot of the companies have already had data breaches. And while that may not be your company, your users are utilizing those services, and your credentials exist, your users' credentials exist in the data dumps from those services. And many times the users are reusing those credentials. So one of the reasons the attackers may be looking for SMBv1 is they can perform credential stuffing directly against SMB service. Why? Because oftentimes that is not covered by multi-factor authentication. If I'm performing password credential stuffing or password spraying against your Outlook or your RDP or your Citrix, I may be thwarted by 2FA, by multi-factor authentication, but that may not be the case with SMB directly. Right? So that's a pretty easy way to just jump into the environment and start interacting with it, right? And then you've got the Eternal Blue and Mirai botnets and Conti we've been hearing a lot about. there is a lot of exploitation of existing misconfigurations and existing unpatched vulnerabilities happening. And really just as an attacker, that is what I'm looking for daily in our client networks. And that is what your typical threat in this landscape is going to be looking for.
Just to jump in there, I did toss into the chat the top things that we've been seeing in the last 24 hours. So SMBV1, Eternal Blue, Exchange server vulnerabilities, the Fortinet CVE, which is an unauthenticated VPN attack, Apache Log4j, and we were really seeing specifics on the VMware side of the fence for that Apache one. And if we exclude the bottom three of DDoS, Telnet, and SSH, they're really hitting in on exactly what you're talking about, which is configuration, patching, so far. So I just figured I'd toss that in there because it literally lines up with exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, Exchange has been hit quite often in past few years, and with some pretty big vulnerabilities that came out within past 3 years with that. You combine that with some really big vulnerabilities in overall Windows infrastructure, your petit podem, your SAM impersonation, your ability to read SAM hives and system hives as a low privilege user that existed in Windows 10 for a few years before it was discovered, might I add, accidentally. Right? Those issues are going to continue to be exploited and looked for. And I'm not surprised that DDoS is in that list, because as the attacker is no longer worried about being discovered, they're no longer afraid of attribution, they are going to go straight towards denial of service. And that may be one of the reasons they're also looking for SMBV1, because a lot of denial of service vulnerabilities exist there. Right? Or at very minimum, I mean, not really a great and hidden way to do this, but you could just start spraying passwords. Not necessarily passwords, you could start brute forcing passwords, where you're not just doing one password every 30 minutes, you're doing 10, 15 a second, and you start locking out accounts. That is a very easy to do denial of service attack. You can just do that with something simple as crackmap exec. You could do that with Metasploit. You could do that with Hydra. All freely available tools. You don't need to have government resources for that.
Swinging back around to the blue team side, ask yourself the question, can I spot these kinds of attacks? Am I monitoring my network in such a way that I could spot a password brute forcing attack like Q just described? Or do I even know if I'm vulnerable via my Exchange server? Yeah, those are the proactive steps that you need to be taking in the kind of global threat environment that we're in right now to better protect your network and your data.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually, let me just drop these in here also. Shodan.io, and spice.com. Those are the two that we are using quite often to find what exists in your public infrastructure before we even get to active information gathering. Right? We're simply just trying to find out what the world knows about you and your networks, what IPs are live in your ranges, and what services they're offering, what exists in your SSL TLS certificates for the CNAME field, so we can find out some additional hosts or subdomains you may have. Because that infrastructure oftentimes includes devices you weren't even aware of. Maybe an office in Colorado has their Sonic wall connected to the internet. Well, I mean, it would be, but publicly accessible login portal. Maybe your alpaca farm has some kind of IoT device, right? Publicly accessible. So it's important to know what already exists. And these sites are actively scanning the internet and collecting that information. And it's good to understand what you have. Before you can start locking all the doors, you need to know what doors exist, where the cracks may be. Where do you have a completely glass door that somebody could just throw a brick in and walk into? Right? So understanding that external infra is probably the most important thing you can do right now.
I 100% agree with that. So anything else from the red side of the fence, Q, that you wanted to touch upon with the current threat landscape?
Yes, definitely. The last thing I'll talk about in there is something that Corey, your team is doing, and it makes my life difficult. All right, I want to point out it's making my life difficult, Corey, is the microsegmentation. You have the attacker in the network, and that is going to happen. Unfortunately, that is the state of the world right now. There will be a breach. Question is, what are you going to do to slow down the attacker? Right? And the data center days, I remember working my data center, well, not my data center, but the data center I worked at, I couldn't go to bathroom without having to badge into two places. Right? So trying to do something similar in your networks, trying to segment out your sensitive data from non-sensitive data. Right? David at front desk does not need to access your credit card data, or your developers who are developing in test environments don't need to directly jump into production and start making changes. So figuring out what is normal in your network and trying to segment services out is probably one of the best things you can do to slow down the attacker. And also it will help you find out if there is any malicious activity, right? As you start to analyze how the workstation A is talking to workstation B, or maybe your workstations don't talk to each other. I mean, they don't really have a good reason to talk to each other. They'll always go through the domain controller or a file share. So trying to break that connectivity between workstations is going to help you stop lateral movement.
I love it, Q. I love it.
Well,
But
I don't
see,
as an attacker.
we're slowly,
Just
we're
making it
slowly
clear you're looking at the network as an attacker would. Sorry, Corey. I mean to
no
interrupt.
worries.
But
All good.
it really, good summary. Q just gave us a lot of great depth there. And there are a lot of people that are on this call that are maybe not technical folks that weren't following some of what he was talking about. But the purpose and principle there is look at your environment as an attacker would, right? Don't just assume that because you've installed various software, various controls that they're working and protecting you the way that you expect they will. Take the time to actually validate that by doing offensive teaming and really having people test you and validate your environment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we're going to slowly steal Q to the blue side. He's wearing a blue shirt. He's talking like a blue teamer now. I mean, it's happening. So
no, we're going to steal Mike instead. Mike's coming to the red.
Oh. Why don't we just work together, people? Let's just work together.
Exactly. So we'll transition over to what are we doing to shore up our services and defenses. That point there on the slide. So what we're doing at this point in time, and I'll let David and Mike, Cole, and Chris talk a little bit more about some of these things as well. But let's take a moment and pause just for a second. We're seeing internal strife between some of the largest APTs that we've ever seen. If you look at Conti, for example, they were just publicly shown. There was some publicity shown about that ransomware group that they had an insider threat that just started pushing out all of their internal messages. We're watching threats of attacks on supply chain, critical infrastructure. We watched wipers hit the Ukraine prior to physical. So if you think about that and you start listening to what Q just talked about and some of those items that we've dropped into the chat, David brought up some very good questions. Are you even aware? Are you able to discern whether these attacks are hitting you? So what we're doing today, as it pertains to our services, is we've begun very, very, very vigorous threat hunts. Obviously, we have many hooks into the different threat intelligence feeds out there. We're watching social media, things of that nature, and really working as a community with other cybersecurity folks, right? We all have friends, we all know of people, but it's the dissemination, it's the sharing of information that becomes so important during these times. So one of the major things that we're doing is we're taking all of the intel that has been shared with us and applying it to not only ourselves, but to our customer base. I think that that's probably one of the most important things that we can do during these times. Scrutinizing the data, right? So every little piece of thing that comes up where maybe, 2 weeks ago, we would have said, that's probably a false positive. And it probably was, but we're no longer taking that stance. So paranoia can truly put people into a better place to a degree. There's a degree there. You have to stay sane too. But making sure that you're scrutinizing every detail as it pertains to your individual environment. And that's the stance that we're taking. In employing deeper block lists against different IP addresses as they're coming up, and different indicators of compromise as they're coming up. And really ensuring that, we're taking all of the intelligence that we feasibly can and any typical indicator and ripping it across all of our customer bases. So we're going to be doing that, and current clients are going to get a ton of questions from us at this point in time, and that's great. But that's the communication that will be ultimately key during these situations, I think. With that being said, though, kind of transitioning over to what do we recommend to everyone in general? What are the things that we recommend for people to do? Well, just what I said, taking your security posture very seriously is the first place. Understanding exactly what should be happening in your environment. If you don't know, maybe that's where you start. Or like Q said a little bit earlier, you can't protect what you're unaware of that's in your network. So maybe you need to start with asset inventory. You need to understand what is even in your network. Looking at things like OS hardening techniques or configuration management. SMBv1 that's a configuration, that's a hardening technique that you should take. SMBv or SMB signing could help stifle somebody getting a foothold into your environment from moving laterally. That's another configuration, things of that nature. So if you look at that, those are some basic blocking and tackling. MFA. Geofencing and I hate to say it, but geofencing from Russia. It's not an end all be all, but we're seeing direct correlations from them, direct Russian IP addresses scanning the internet, trying to, exploit vulnerabilities. So while that's not an end all be all, can they get around that? Absolutely. And do we think that the only place that's attacking right now is Russia? Not exactly. But it's definitely a foot in the right direction. Blocking any email from that country or any country that you're not doing business for that matter, as well as IP addresses, is probably another great measure too. And with that, I'll pass the torch over to David, Mike, Chris, and Cole to just toss out some of their thoughts as well.
I'll jump right in because you mentioned email. And in our world today, every business uses email. And unfortunately, it is probably one of the most prevalent attack vectors via phishing. And a lot of times it's just ignored. We either trust our end users not to click that link and download that malicious software, or we just don't pay attention to it. So one recommendation would be definitely to be checking on your email. Using some kind of a email security program like Proofpoint, just as one example off the top of my head, to give you an added layer of defense. And to kind of circle back to those basics, that's where we're at. We need to layer our defenses. We've talked about all kinds of different things, everything from network segmentation to phishing. All those come into play when we talk about layered defenses. And whether it's a physical conflict or a cyber conflict, those same strategies hold true. So we need to bring those all to bear when it comes to this kind of a global event, really, without trying to be too dramatic about it. And then your endpoint security, that's where your attackers are going to end up. Make sure that you have insight into those endpoints, those servers, those user systems that are out on your network. What can you see going on there? What kind of visibility do you have? And I know from Q's talks and my own background, You get on an endpoint, and a lot of times you're sitting there in the dark. No one even knows you're there for a far too long of a period of time. So there's all kinds of different kind of threat hunts internally you can even consider doing as far as memory analysis, forensics. That's my forte. So there's a lot on the plate here, and it would do us well to take into account all those different angles when it comes to defending against these kinds of attacks. Long-winded, but I'm done.
David, could you maybe touch base a little bit on you or anybody else on your team on threat hunts? We've thrown that word around a lot, and what I want to get out of that is for those who either don't have the knowledge or resources, what does it mean to them, and what are some of the quick wins they can do in terms of threat hunt? How can they do it?
That's a really tough question, Q, when you bring into account the fact that a lot of businesses really don't have insight into their endpoints, and that's where a lot of your threat hunts are going to happen. But there are a lot of what we call indicators of compromise out there, and those websites that Corey showed earlier can give you some of those IOCs, IP addresses, YARA rules, using a program like Carbon Black as an endpoint protection system that you can go into, and you can actually search for running services to see if there's anything out of the ordinary there. Check what programs are installed on a system. Your attackers will oftentimes install their own programs, and because nobody's looking or nobody's watching, nobody sees them. And they sit there and they run as an executable or as a malicious DLL file, and nobody even knows that they're there. So those are all areas that you could look for. Low-hanging fruit, look in your users' temp folders to see what's sitting in there. A lot of times these attackers will drop their specific tools into the temp folder and then run them from that temp folder across that system, and then use those to expand and traverse across the network as well. Those are just some like low-hanging fruit areas that you can go look for, and then expand it from there. And if you need help, we're here to help. Call us and we'll do everything that we can to help you spin up a threat hunt internally. Even if you don't have these specific tools, we can at least start the process of getting that underway, so that if they're, and like Q mentioned, these attacks are already there. They already have footholds in a lot of these networks that they've targeted previously, and you need to know what to look for there. And that goes beyond the scope of what I can talk to here, but we could definitely help you get a handle on that and know what to go look for.
Thanks for that.
Bouncing off of that, I would like to comment. A lot of your best technology, a lot of your best tools are going to be borderline useless if you don't know how to use them. I can't count the number of times that I've seen high-end endpoint protection be completely useless because it wasn't tuned to specifically stop unauthorized EXEs, or the amount of times that a user has downloaded a file saying that this is particularly urgent, and if you don't act on this right now, this particular email, then your account is going to be deleted irrevocably. A lot of the time, the best things you can do are understand what the tools that are available to you and keep calm. As long as you keep a level head under fire, you can maintain these situations and you can come out of this on top. Just observe, make sure that your people know what they're looking for, and make sure to train them. People are always the first attack vector. People are always where any attacker is going to go after first. And if they're not trained well, they're going to get through there. Same thing with your endpoint protection. If your endpoint protection isn't configured correctly, you might as well not have it. So understand your environment and understand what you need to protect yourself. That's
This
all
is
I have to
why
say.
whenever we do calls with the red team and we're looking at potential products or partners, and we hear someone say set it and forget it, we typically forget talking to them again.
Yeah, we take the second part of it, and I'm glad, Cole, you brought that up, because that reminded me of that for a while when one of the very, very expensive SIM vendors, and I shall not name them, but if I shall talk about the price, you'll know who they are. They were they had a username and a password that were default and they existed in all of their installations. And to their credit, they had asked that in the documentation you should change it. Right? In fact, the password was change me. And a lot of folks wouldn't do that because they had just bought the license, done the installation, and they would one day get to the configuration. And there were modules written for it because part of that SIM was you install an application to analyze the data. Well, I can install an application that sends me a bash or command shell back. And now I have the same access that SIM has on that system, which generally was local system. Or antivirus solutions have had vulnerabilities. I always chuckle when I think about this one where the client, I was performing a pen test from an assumed breach scenario. And they had published no applications to my user because technically this is a vendor who has no internal access until it's formally approved. But one application they always installed or published in that remote portal was an antivirus. And this specific antivirus, I was able to break out of it, and now I had access to the operating system as the antivirus. And it was because they had not disabled the default feature. So understand the defaults that exist in your network. Understand the configurations, and tackle them. Especially as David mentioned and Cole mentioned, your tools. There's no point spending $1 million on a SIM or $10 million on it if you're not going to configure it. Maybe use that money towards something else, right? Maybe instead hire a security analyst, maybe hire a third-party vendor to help you out, or send that security team to training. We all love training. Send them
Yes,
to
we
Black
do.
Hat.
I just put in the chat one website that shows a bunch of the default passwords that Q was just talking about from datarecovery.com. Nearly every system that's floating around out there, from 3Com to BEA to Borland, will have a default password somewhere set up. And the lists are out there that the attackers will take. They'll use those once they identify the systems you have and use that password to get in. It's unfortunately that simple. We like to sit back and think that Q and the red team guys are waving magic wands around and casting spells, and they have their cauldrons going in the background and they're creating this black magic. When in reality, it's a default password list openly available on the internet, or they use Shodan that he's already shared with you, and they've scanned your systems and said, oh, look, they use 3Com. I'll use a default password list from 3Com and the door is opened and they are in. And unfortunately, sometimes it's just that simple.
Thanks, David. I no longer look as cool as I was 2 minutes ago.
Sorry, Q. I gave away the secrets. I'm sorry. Don't pay any attention to the man behind the curtain.
He makes a good point in there, though. I mean, that's what your current threat is going to do. They aren't going to go after, as we mentioned at the beginning of the call, with zero-day attacks. They aren't going to spend a lot of time finding those. They will. They probably already have some, or many, that aren't known. But for the most part, the attacker is going after the low-hanging fruit. Okay, they are going after your default credentials, your easy-to-guess credentials, right? Thanks, Justin. Appreciate that. The attacker is going to go after your test credentials. Maybe one day you spun up your Citrix installation and you created a test account to test it out and you never disabled it. And now there is a test account with a password of test that still exists. Or, as we saw the other day, I forget, Luke, who it was that published that advisory, but they're sending out USB drives with counterfeit Amazon gift cards, right? So, and the Amazon
and they
gift
took
card,
the time to do custom packaging, and it really well done attack.
yeah, and you cannot. And the instructions say, you can, here's a $50 gift card, and use the link provided in the USB drive, or use the code provided in a USB drive to to make use of this card, and you can't use it without you plugging the USB drive. So this is how they're getting people to plug in a USB drive, which happens to be bad USB. That's going to fry your USB port. Okay. That reminds me, a few years ago when some of the Chinese threat actors were sending CDs, and the goal there was to target folks who still have a CD player, right? And that's a very specific set of folks who may not be as apprised on the modern threat landscape, because they aren't possibly as apprised in the modern technology landscape. Though I still have a CD writer laying around with a lot of CDs that I'll probably one day write with Lady Gaga songs. But the attacker is getting very creative, but they aren't always looking for that very sophisticated, difficult attack. They're going after the low-hanging fruit, and that low-hanging fruit are your misconfigured devices, your unpatched devices, your untrained users, your security team that does not have enough time or resources, or your security tooling that hasn't been configured. Okay, so those are your very low-hanging issues that the attacker is going to go after. I'm never going to go and try to find an overlay in your network if I can just use a default password.
100% agree. I mean, it's the old, stand at the front door with a box and look like your hands are full and wait for somebody to open the door for you, instead of trying to find a door without a camera and scaling the building, or, some crazy situation. No, just stand at the door, hold a box. Somebody will eventually come by and be like, do you need help? And open the door right there for you, right? So it's always, what is the path of least resistance with all of these things? So I think another thing we should add to the list is password awareness. Whenever you create your passwords, or being aware of the passwords that are out there, and making sure that they're not only not default, but that there's some semblance of security surrounding them, right? That they're not 8 characters and, I don't know, I'm not even going to throw a word out there because I feel like Q's going to add it to his list. Yeah, password. There we go. So, but any other suggestions from anybody else for things that we think that people should be paying attention to right now or thinking about?
New employees, almost always. That is a big one right now. There are a lot of just default setups to go after new employees and to hit them before their onboarding is complete, before training is complete, and just go after them and be like, oh, hey, you need to reset this right as they're given, say, help desk credentials. It's a really common one lately. And it falls into just understanding that there are always going to be more of these tricks, and it's a mindset of understanding security more than it is trying to enumerate every single trick that it exists. You just need to understand that this is the mindset you need to have and work towards that, rather than trying to get each and every mole. Otherwise, you're playing whack-a-mole forever.
Yep. And so I'll take Edwin actually asked a question there in the chat. Are we seeing any attempts to bribe existing employees to provide access? I mean, we've seen some of that, but we've also seen something a little bit more obscure where threat actors are actually sending their folks in to apply to positions at organizations, and they themselves are the mole, but also being paid by the organization as an employee. So it's almost a double dip, if you will, right? So you're paying this person to be an employee, but they're actually there not to work for you. So we are seeing both of those things occurring, and we've been watching things like that occur across the last several months, I'll say. I won't say that it didn't happen before then, but we ourselves have seen an increase in that type of activity, especially the one less bribing of employees or blackmailing of employees, and more of, let's just get one of our folks that know that position in and out to work for that organization, as if they are, they might actually be an expert in that particular position, could be a higher level position, could be in IT, could be for, who knows what, HR or whatever. They're very good at that position, but they're very good at that position because they want to seem like a regular employee. So hopefully that answers that question. Mike, you're tossing some stuff over there into the chat. Anything you wanted to toss in?
Just really quick, go ahead and start watching Chinese IP addresses as well. There's been some activity this morning from China on the internet. Really, any communist country, keep an eye out for them. Also, with hacktivist groups and other hacking groups jumping on the bandwagon and trying to tip the scale against Russia, it's going to amplify. So just keep an eye out for that. And we're hoping right now that they don't hit some sort of switch on the Russian side that will topple into a kinetic response, because there's a lot of people that aren't very skilled targeting Russia right now, and they may accidentally hit a soft spot unknowingly, and which will tip the scale and will be an all-out like cyber attack. So just keep an eye on those countries, and especially China, because China's already making physical threats and doing some flexing as far as flybys and stuff like that, and internet activity as well. So look for that to be another front coming in.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. All right, guys. Well, I want to turn over some time to the participants to ask questions or have anything along those lines that, you have questions about, or you'd like to talk through or hear from one of us. Doesn't have to be me. I don't have to be the one to answer it, or I can. But if you have any questions, I'll leave a few moments here to toss those into the chat if you'd like, and we'll answer them as they come in.
So Justin just asked a really good question. Is it a good practice to block out these countries completely, or just loose grip as needed? I think so I've got two sides of that sword here. First, if you have no business with that country or with that IP space, there's really no need to allow access from there. The second side of that sword, which I am often concerned about, is the security by obscurity. You have hidden yourself from them in some way. You've blocked them completely, and now you fall into the false sense of security that they cannot attack you. So while we do suggest a low listing where you only allow who is going to access your network, or you do some deny listing where you deny anybody, or block listing where you just stop anybody from accessing you if you don't do any business with them, by country, by IP space, by type of device. Don't think that is a silver bullet, that is a golden solution. That is not. It is only a very small part of what should be an overarching cybersecurity program. Because one of the things that we often do in here, as we are blocked from performing password guessing attacks, we will just spin up a proxy in AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, and we will proxy our traffic through that. Right? So the attacker will find a way around it. This is really just stopping a lot of the script kiddies or a lot of scanners, right? That are just performing scans across the network, across the internet to find vulnerabilities. It's a very small part of it. It's an important part, but very small part of your defense program. All right. Any other questions, folks?
Edwin had a question where he asked, and it's right on what we were just talking about. Are we seeing attempts to bribe existing employees to provide access? Absolutely. That's something that if you go and hang out at all on the Onion sites or look at what some of these threat groups are doing, it's more advanced than that. I mean, it's literally to a point where you can go sign up and they will call you and run you through description or through a series of questions to understand how you could potentially be somebody that they want to leverage for insider information or insider access. It's at the point where a lot of these malware companies don't even care where you work. It's something they can leverage to potentially pull information or be able to ransom data. So yes, we do see that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Luke. And as always, I'll pause for a few moments here to let anybody ask any last minute questions that they want to. Chris, did you want to talk about what you just tossed in the chat real quick?
Yeah. So oftentimes what I've seen over the past couple of years due to the pandemic, we see more and more users working from home, obviously. And then also before that, I've seen users coming into the offices, and everybody in this world normally has a cell phone. They have an iPad. They have something along the lines that's personal and it's not company issued. So there's really no reason for that device, say that you bring it into a corporate environment, to be able to access a corporate wireless that can then make its way through to servers, access along that lines. That's why I'm stating in the chat that you should probably have a separate wireless or something in place to control these bring your own device.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. That's awesome. All right. Well, I haven't seen any additional questions in the chat. Oh, we got another one. As the key holder for a large org's network, do I need any additional precautions for technology outside of the workplace? That's a great question.
We talk about that for an hour. We kind of have on some of the other webinars we've done, but absolutely. When people moved to remote work or were already at work, remote work, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record here, but things like MFA and making sure that you've got full disk encryption and that there are other protections in place in case those devices go missing or damaged or lost. I think that's a critical first thought. I think that as you start taking the next steps on the maturity, really making sure that you've got solid endpoint protection and ways of being able to monitor and see what's happening on those devices is another big step. So, I'll let others jump in here, but that's a lot of work and a lot of conversation because it is, you're changing your infrastructure and how you operate, how you work from a day-to-day perspective. So there are going to be dramatic changes that need to happen across your information technology and business.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the move to remote workplace, it requires a lot of additional monitoring, and it also falls into a lot of gray areas. If you're allowing folks to use their personal device to connect to your workplace, to check email, to log into maybe a remote desktop, then how far can you go with monitoring? Do you have the ability to monitor their personal device? That's where you got to bring in your legal team to talk. I'm not educated enough to talk about that. But what are they doing inside your network with those personal devices is something you can monitor and should monitor. What type of devices are they logging in with? If I am checking my email, my ideal email from a personal device, it's only going to be one or two different types of devices. I'm not going to all of a sudden log into my ideal email from a Nigerian IP address using a Samsung device. Yeah, not saying I will not be found using a Samsung device ever, but not the one I use currently, right? So being able to profile what your users are using to interact with your services, interact with their workplace applications, and then looking for anomalies there is even more important today than it was before, and it's going to continue to increase in importance. You cannot protect against what you don't know.
100% agree with that, Q. Especially because, like you said, let's say it goes from a Samsung to a Nokia, let's just say, and then a BlackBerry device, and then over to an iPhone. Okay, we might be able to say, yeah, you might have an iPad, you might have an Android tablet, but at the end of the day, how many times do you reasonably change out your cell phone? Once a year, once every 6 months, once every 2 years? Probably not as often as what you might hit from.
I think it might depend how much you're paying employees, how often they change your cell phone.
All right, well, that's a different conversation for a different day, Q.
And then
Uh,
the other thing would be, is it a company issued phone? So like obviously
Right.
people that issue phones for a company, you're not going to change that every 2 months.
Yeah.
Maybe personal you could, but not company issued.
And Michelle has a really
And-
good question in there that I think Corey and Luke, it's in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. How can we best encourage an organization to adopt more secure practices? I'll let Luke go for first go at that.
Yeah, this is what I do all day long, right? Is talk to organizations and businesses, specifically at the executive level, to help them kind of associate and understand where they need to be spending money, what the prioritization is, and really what are the things they can do that are going to make the largest impacts or changes within their environment through that program. Security maturity is a hard one, right? You've got to understand where you're at in that journey in order to make sure that you've got the right budget, the right focus, the right people, the right assets, everything in place to really be able to do that. But I think that, as far as a company-wide type training and really opening people's eyes, the way I'd approach it is finding yourself a trusted advisor or partner who specializes in this stuff. Obviously I'm going to sit here and tout us because we're doing this webinar. But it's what a lot of organizations have us come in to do. We'll do an initial assessment. We'll really understand and take into consideration aspects about their business, their IT, the way that they operate, how they generate money, the culture within the business. And then we can create specific programs that speak to the people who work within that organization and help define policies and procedures that really kind of advance them along that security mission. So it's not I realize that's a very complex answer to a fairly simple question as far as the way that you go at it, but really, taking the steps to always be moving forward would be one of the biggest things I can summarize it as. Never, ever rest on your laurels and think that you've got everything secured or that you've got things shored up. It should be a continuous journey to advancement.
Absolutely. And so just to dive onto that a little bit more, David threw in there into the chat, he's absolutely right as well, which is understanding that your company going company-wide with a training for your employees is a great first step, because security starts with everyone. Security isn't a small niche individual or set or small group of the organization. If I go back to the analogy that I gave earlier to Q about somebody standing there with a box at the front door, if nobody understands that we have this badge in, badge out policy, and that you can't just allow somebody to quote unquote piggyback into your organization, they're going to be more likely to help that person in that situation, right? And just open up the door, let them go in freely to go to the place that they're supposed to be delivering that package to. So that first step of training and including everyone into your security response is a very, very big step. It's a great step in the right direction as well, because it makes sure that, like I said, security starts with everyone. Even outside of your organization, you have to be concerned with your personal security. There's nobody else looking out for your personal security. I mean, there's entities that help you in that way, right? But at the end of the day, you are responsible for your own security as much in an organization as personally, is my point. So that's what I'll say to that. Just to piggyback a little bit on what Luke said. Obviously, there are many other ways and many other things, but that's definitely it. And then we have, looks like one more question here. Are honeypots being used? If so, how have they helped with exploit detection? How has it improved your security policies, then placed your internal and external?
Can I answer
Then
that?
placed in the external. Go ahead, Q. Go
From
ahead.
personal
Absolutely.
experience, again, one more thing that Corey's team is doing that makes my job so much more difficult. I was
You're welcome,
pen testing
Q.
a client a few weeks ago, and I was very happy. Oh my God, they have MS 0867, they have MS 1710, they have all these Exchange vulnerabilities, they have all of these MS SQL vulnerabilities, their default credentials in MS SQL. And then I realized it's a single host that has all of that. So I start thinking, do I call the client and tell them to get a flamethrower ready? Or do I try to find out if it's a honeypot? And turns out it was a honeypot from the EDR solution that we are using. And as an attacker was in the network trying to find vulnerabilities, it was creating those fake scenarios, making me all happy and wasting my time. So Corey, you can speak now.
Absolutely. So in tandem with that, while someone like you or an actual adversary is going after those honeypots, I'll call them, there's also alerts going off to us that alert us of those activities. So honeypots are used in many different ways to slow down an attacker, to understand what an attacker is trying to go after is another really great use case for honeypots, because if they in that case, let's say Q didn't figure out that it was a honeypot and he went after it, we would start to see some tactics and techniques that he was utilizing to get into that machine or land on that machine. Once he landed on the machine, what he did next, what was he looking for? What tool sets is he utilizing? So they can create a whole host of new indicators or indicators on your current situation. And then furthermore, it can help you detect and alert upon suspicious activity and what's happening across your network. So you can improve your policies based upon the things that you see across those. And then there are, in the global scale of things, all kinds of honeypots deployed out there that can be utilized to gather additional intelligence. So I could probably spend tons of time on that, but I know it's 101. So I'm going to go ahead and pause there. If you guys have any questions, anything along those lines, feel free to reach out to us. On behalf of myself and the rest of the folks on this call, I thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Stay vigilant and stay safe, everyone. I appreciate everything. Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.